We dreamed of flying for tens of thousands of years, and when we finally took to the skies, in barely 5 decades, we progressed from propeller-powered flight at a jogging pace to jets, pushing us towards and beyond the sound barrier. We do not ride into this new jet age on the winds of exploration to overcome barriers for their own sake. It's a bumpy ride on the thumping, deadly pistons of war, an arms race to the skies that will transform humanity forever. Welcome to Season 1 of TimeGhost Cold War coverage in our series War to War, where we cover the events of the decade after World War II that brought man from the brink of destruction to the threshold of the stars. I'm Spartacus Olson. Before flight pioneers, human flight was deemed impossible, yet dreamers like Leonardo da Vinci unsuccessfully imagined flying machines. Success arrived on June 4th, 1783, when the Montgolfier brothers, Joseph Michel and Jacques Etienne, publicly presented the hot air balloon. Months later, on November 21st of the same year, 2 humans flew and survived, seeing the world from above for the first time. One of the passengers recounts, once back on firm ground. "We have done it! The air is breathable! Man has achieved the dream of Icarus!" To those on the ground, it is nothing short of magical. One of them, a diplomat envoy from the newly born nation of the United States of America named Benjamin Franklin, is enthralled by what he witnesses. "All conversation here at present turns upon the balloons and the means of managing them so as to give men the advantage of flying." About 100 years later, Otto Lilienthal enters the picture. He is obsessed with gliders. He's not the first. Others like Sir George Cayley may have preceded him, but Lilienthal makes up for any late arrival with sheer obsession. Thousands of test flights, many iterations of various designs, meticulous notes, publications, and public demonstrations. But it's only gliding powered by gravity. Run down a hill, glide a bit, and hopefully land safe. The next step is powered flight. Enter Wilbur and Orville Wright and the internal combustion engine. Carl Benz already used it to revolutionize carriages, so why not gliders? On October 9th, 1903, the New York Times publishes an article titled "Flying Machines Which Do Not Fly." It comes 2 days after aviation pioneer Samuel P. Langley's new flying machine did not deliver on its name. The Times speculates. It might be assumed that the flying machine, which will really fly, might be evolved by the combined and continuous efforts of mathematicians and mechanicians in from 1 million to 10 million years. 69 days later, the Wright Brothers prove it would only take, 69 days, when their flying machine takes off and flies. Close to the ground, not so fast, and not for too long, but it flies. That flight sets off experiments across the world, and while it is tentative steps at first, in 5 years, the idea of powered flight arrives with the people that will propel it from niche experimental engineering to a staple of modern society, the military. In 1909, the U.S. Army Signal Corps purchases their first heavier-than-air flying machine from the Wright brothers for $30,000, with a maximum flight speed of 42 miles, 67 kilometers per hour, and a maximum flight duration of 1 hour. It's more of a toy than a war machine. Nevertheless, on August 2nd, 1909, it's designated Signal Corps Airplane Number 1, and then remains the only U.S. Army airplane for nearly 2 years. By then, the first planes are about to go into active war service a continent away. Between 1911 and 1913, the Italo-Turkish War and the Balkan Wars demonstrate that planes do have a solid use for signals intelligence and even bombing, which at this point means pilots eyeballing a target by leaning over the side and throwing a grenade. Like the Wright planes, these planes are little more than gliders. But only a year later, that and the world in general is about to change drastically. Now, while I might disagree with the first Greek philosopher Heraclitus' famous saying that war is the father of all things, it definitely applies to the development of aviation from a hobby to global industry. When World War I erupts in 1914, planes are still mainly a tool for reconnaissance and artillery spotting, but soon the aerial war captures both the imagination and reality of battle. By mid-1915, three specializations emerge: pursuit, fighters to shoot down enemy aircraft, observation, and bombers. By war's end, planes have evolved from glorified gliders into fast-flying single-prop killing machines and multi-engine hunkering giant bombers crewed by a dozen men or more. But the greatest transformation is perhaps the scale of the aeronautical industry. Before the war, the European powers altogether possessed 1,162 military aircraft, and the US only a dozen. Then, during the war, the belligerents on both sides produced a total of 205,308 aircraft and 235,535 engines. By then, the world's airplane industry employs tens of thousands and has become an established part of the global economy. But peace brings new challenges. The race for civil aviation is still undecided, with balloons, or rather rigid dirigibles like the Zeppelins, seen by many as a true leadership contender for peacetime transportation. And while that might look realistic, the greater practicality of the airplane and the sheer momentum that the war has brought to airplane production will win out the day. Across the world, the central value of airplanes has been understood, and national efforts to promote the industry emerge across the globe. In the US, this is institutionalized in the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, that coordinates aerodynamic testing to feed the wind tunnels that now hum with trial models and boost the factory production lines as they continue to learn how to turn drawings into thousands of serviceable airframes. The result is an industrial ecosystem: metallurgy, precision machining, engine design, and trained labor. While these are put to use in this nascent golden age of civil transportation, it is a system of production that can be redirected to war in a way small workshops could never. The 1920s and 30s see the development of faster airframes, stronger alloys, more powerful engines, improved aerodynamics, and organized production that will soon feed into the next chapter of aviation history. As the idea that the Great War was a war to end all war dies a slow death in the endless conflagrations that follows, aviation develops into a full-blown industrial arm of war. Already when World War II breaks out, air forces are no longer collections of hobbyists, but a huge machine of organized weapon systems, strategic bombing, carrier fleets, fighter screens, and integrated air defense networks driven by radar and control centers that will reshape the battlefield. The conflict accelerates specialization. Long-range heavy bombers, naval carrier fighters, tactical fighter bombers, night fighters, and long-range escorts become distinct tools of statecraft, each forcing advances in engines, airframes, and avionics at breakneck pace. Already before the war, some visionaries see that the piston engine and incremental improvements will not be enough to maintain hegemony in this head-over-heels technological arms race. At some point, propellers will reach their physical limits to create the fastest, deadliest, and most versatile warplanes. A radical idea is needed, and that is in part inspired by another nascent arm of engineering, rocketry. Thus, a gas turbine that breathes air, burns fuel, and spits out thrust begins to dominate the imagination of a handful of brilliant, stubborn engineers. In Britain, the RAF officer Frank Whittle patents a turbojet concept in 1930, founds power jets in 1936, and runs a working engine in 1937. His work gives the idea institutional momentum in Britain. In Germany, independently and almost simultaneously, Hans von Ohain develops a competing centrifugal flow turbojet and, backed by Heinkel, powers the world's first jet-propellered flight in 1939. It is therefore fair to treat Whittle and von Ohain as co-founders of the turbojet school, simultaneous inventions rather than a tidy single first. Germany, gripped by strategic desperation and the propaganda dream of Wunderwaffen, is the first regime to throw large state resources at jet and rocket projects as potential war-changing weapons. The same program that yields the V2 rocket also accelerates jet work and gives projects like the Me-262 political priority. But commitment is not the same as decisive effect. Nazi wonder weapons are revolutionary in idea and tragic in human cost, yet too late, too scarce, or too unreliable to alter the war's course. Behind that state-backed rush, piston-engine fighters keep evolving at wartime speed. Clean, stressed skins monoplanes, powerful supercharged engines, and improved aerodynamics push speeds and ceilings far beyond 1939 expectations. Airframes and production tooling adapt so that designs like the RAF Spitfire and de Havilland Mosquito, the Luftwaffe's Bf-109 and FW-190 families, and the US Mustang and Thunderbolt can be produced in the thousands and specialized into interceptors, long-range escorts, and fighter bombers. These advances matter not for romantic duels, but for operational effect. The long-range P-51, for example, lets escort fighters accompany American bombers deep into Germany and helps blunt unescorted bomber losses. Then the Me-262 arrives, and the difference is visceral. Its turbojets give it a decisive speed and dash advantage over piston fighters, able to overtake bomber boxes and choose when to engage, and its heavy cannon armaments makes it lethal against heavy bombers. But the Me-262 also exposes the limits of first-generation jets. The Jumo 004 engines are temperamental and short-lived. Throttle response and low speed thrust are poor. Takeoff and landing become especially dangerous. Maintenance and spare part shortages hobble readiness, and production is too late and too constrained to change the strategic balance. In short, the Me-262 proves the possibility of a new regime, while also showing that the regime is not yet fully operational. The British Gloster Meteor offers the complementary lesson. Less sensational in top speed than the Me-262, but steadier and more immediately serviceable, the Meteor demonstrates that jet aircraft can be integrated into operations, countering V-1s and performing home defense patrols, without the worst of German engine fragility. Together, the two types teach a clear lesson. Turbojet propulsion is no longer a laboratory curiosity, but the axis around which future fighters will be built. The Me-262 shows the performance ceiling, the Meteor shows practicability, serviceability, and by 1945, it is obvious that piston fighters are approaching their limits in the face of turbine power. The immediate post-war years turned the race for aviation mastery into a head-to-head scramble. Allied teams sweep German airfields and test centers to seize aircraft, documents, and engineers. The US Watson's Wizards and Operation Lusty haul entire Messerschmitts and research files back to America for study, while Project Paperclip brings German scientists into US programs. At the same time, the Soviets moved their own prize list. Operation Osovyachim extracts thousands of specialists and equipments into the USSR. The result is immediate. The Cold War scientific front opens on captured hangars and test rigs. What the Allies find matters. German test facilities and aerodynamic research are world-class, and some installations even include high-speed wind tunnels and advanced aerodynamics work that accelerate American programmers when the hardware and planes arrive stateside. But speed is the real simple metric that rearranges priorities. Jets promise new velocity that in turn promises new tactical options. Dash, climb, and the chance to control engagement. With that energy edge, air combat shifts away from sustained turning fights towards hit-and-run strikes, boom and zoom attacks. Energy fighting and vertical maneuvers dominate as pilots trade tight turning scraps for altitude and speed management. Command control and radar starts to matter as much as classical dogfighting skill. The pilot who controls energy and closure rates controls the fight. The engineering response is ferocious. Breaking the sound barrier turns from an academic problem into a practical imperative. Compressibility, choke formation, and controlled reversal at transonic speeds produce dangerous handling quirks that require new solutions. The Bell X-1 program and Chuck Yeager's Mach 1 flight in 1947 proved both the danger and the price. Rocket power, an all-moving tailplane, and careful shaping tamed the transonic regime. while swept wing theory, pioneered in Germany by Busemann and turned into usable designs and data during the war, becomes the standard aerodynamic fix to delay drag rise and enable higher transonic performance. These discoveries, area sweep, control surface design, and new test regimes rewrite the aerodynamic playbook for fighters. By late 49 to 50, this vanguard development is on the cusp of going mainstream. The Gloster Meteor is already in RAF squadrons, and jet fighters and trainers proliferate, and civil milestones follow fast. In civilian aeronautics, the de Havilland Comet first flies in 1949 and enters BOAC service in 1952, signaling that jet propulsion will reshape both military and passenger aviation. The hardware, test centers, and production lines are now in place. The jet is a rapidly expanding reality. The United States now pushes hard to make a swept-wing jet its standard fighter. North American's F-86 Sabre, first flown in 1947 and entering USAF service in 1949, embodies that push. A swept 35-degree wing, potent General Electric Allison turbojet power plants, and handling tuned for high transonic work. Transonic being a flight condition where the air flowing over an aircraft is a mix of both subsonic and supersonic velocities simultaneously. The Sabre gives American pilots a balanced mix of speed, maneuverability, and near-sonic speeds, and good gun-sight avionics for accurate firing, a design optimized to win the energy fight the jet era creates. The Soviet answer comes quickly and brutally effective. The MiG-15, also first flown in 47 and also entering service by 49, combines swept wings, excellent climb and high altitude performance, and heavy cannon armaments with two 23mm and one 37mm gun, designed to rip apart high altitude bomber formations. Its raw rate of climb and ceiling are a shock to Western planners. The MiG is superb in vertical maneuvers and in intercepting heavy bombers, even if its long-range systems and pilot training differ from Western practice. When Sabre meets MiG, the result is instant and brutal. The first known jet versus jet dogfights erupt over Korea in late 1950, with the MiG-15 initially surprising UN pilots and prompting the rush of F-86 squadrons into the theater. Tactically, the two types trade strengths, the MiG's climb and heavy guns versus the Sabre's handling, training, and fire control advantages. And the early encounters proved that the jet fighter competition will now shape air doctrine and pilot training for decades during the Cold War. The United States searches for a way to break the jet stalemate on its terms, and their chosen lever is guided weapons. The Air Force fields the Hughes GAR-1 Falcon as its first operational guided air-to-air missile in 1956, a radar-guided short-range interceptor missile designed to stop high-altitude bombers and to be carried by the new generation of interceptors. The Falcon is state-of-the-art for its moment, but it is also specialized, fragile, and tailored to a specific Cold War doctrine that imagines mass Soviet bomber streams rather than agile dogfights. At the same time, a scrappy Navy project out of China Lake gives the world the Sidewinder, a small, cheap, passive infrared heat seeker that trades complexity for effectiveness. William McLean and his team prove a radical point. A lightweight, inexpensive seeker with simple cooling and robust fusing can beat bulkier, more ambitious designs in the real world. The Sidewinder receives fleet approval in the mid-1950s and is in naval use by 1956. Its low cost, adaptability, and heat seeker simplicity soon makes it ubiquitous and, in time, a model copied and reverse engineered worldwide. By that time, the mid-1950s, fighter planes experience another revolution. The United States pushes supersonic performance into operational service. The F-100 Super Sabre, the direct evolutionary heir to the Sabre family, enters U.S. Air Force service in 1954 as the service's first fighter capable of sustained supersonic flight in level flight. The Super Sabre crystallizes the shift from transonic handling to sustained high-speed operations, more thrust, thinner wings, new stability, trim regimes, and more demanding pilot training. The Sabre lineage keeps evolving through the decade, but the F-100 marks the clear moment when supersonic performance becomes doctrinally central for frontline fighters. Other U.S. types follow fast and in different roles. The Convair F-102 Delta Dagger, operational 1956, becomes the Air Force's first operational supersonic all-weather interceptor, and the service's first Delta Wing fighter, the McDonnell F-101 family, appears in the mid-1950s as a fast fighter, fighter bomber, and reconnaissance platform, entering various services in 1957 to 58, and Lockheed's F-104 burst into the scene as a Mach 2 capable point fighter. In the Soviet side, the MiG-19, entering production around 1955, gives the USSR its first widely deployed supersonic fighter. Together, these types signal a wholesale jump in capability. It's a thunderclap of development. In barely 5 years, from 1945 to 1950, the apex of piston-era design gives way to the first operational jets, and in only another 5 years, by the mid-1950s, those jets themselves are eclipsed by a new supersonic generation. The pace is almost unreal. Airframes, engines, aerodynamics, and weapons that once took years to mature now iterate in months. The result is not merely faster planes. It is a new strategic architecture. Supersonic fighters paired with radar and guided missiles reshape interception, air defense, nuclear delivery concepts, and the projection of power. Airspace control becomes a decisive national capability rather than an adjunct to ground operations. The technological curve creates whole new doctrines, force structures, and industrial ecosystems almost overnight. What was cutting edge in 1945 is obsolete by 1957. And while it is the military developments that drive this rapid evolution of human transportation, the civilian use of these technologies is not far behind. The Comet introduces pressurized cabins and unprecedented speed, but catastrophic metal fatigue accidents in 1953 and 54 force a redesign of airframes and windows, shaping future safety standards. In the meantime, the Soviet Tupolev Tu-104 becomes the first successful jetliner in regular service in 1955, followed by the improved Comet 4 in 1957. Boeing's prototype 367-80 from 1954 lays the groundwork for the 707, marking the transition from experimental jet travel to the dawn of the modern transcontinental jet age by 1957. By then, in less than a human lifetime, we have not only conquered the skies, but laid the groundwork for a global infrastructure of transportation that will have a greater impact on human life than any other development in human history. Only 31 years before the Wright Brothers' flight, Jules Verne, the grandfather of modern science fiction, popularized the sensational idea that you could circumnavigate the globe in only 80 days. Less than a century later, in 1957, 3 United States Air Force Boeing B-52 Stratofortresses make the first non-stop jet aircraft circumnavigation in 45 hours and 19 minutes. In 2025, you can wake up in Singapore, and by the power of jets and time zones, you can have a late lunch in New York. Once an incomprehensibly large body that could only be traversed by the bold through slow, lengthy, and dangerous navigation across land and sea, our world has become a village on a pebble floating in the endlessness of space. Like in every village, we now completely depend on each other. When your neighbor falls sick, it may soon be your illness. When the crops of the farmer down the road fail, you too may very soon go hungry. If 2 of your neighbors decide to hate each other and start burning down their houses, that fire is only hours away from you and is very soon your immediate problem. Likewise, when the farmer produces more grain than planned, you will benefit, and the cure for your neighbor's illness can be at your doorstep in only hours. If we band together, we can quickly squash that fire and stop the arsonists. The age of the jet airplane has given you the power to be a meaningful part of the world. You can choose to use it destructively or to seize the moment and reach for the skies. Ignore it at your own peril.